In front of millions, Jasmine Crockett tore open Melania Trump's $50 million divorce contract. Under blinding lights, marriage became politics and silence became currency. The hearing turned into history's most dangerous standoff. So what secret inside that contract was powerful enough to shake America to its core? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. The U.S. Capitol turned into a theater of war. The official headline was First Families and Political Conflicts of Interest, but everyone knew this wasn't policy, it was scandal. Millions of eyes were locked on the broadcast senators, shifting in their chairs, reporters clutching pens, older voters leaning closer to their screens. The silence was sharp, almost dangerous, as if one wrong breath could set the room on fire. This was no family drama. It was a battle over truth, money, and raw power. At one end sat Jasmine Crockett, young fierce, her red folder thick as a bomb waiting to detonate. She didn't fidget. She didn't blink. Across from her, Melania Trump arrived like ice. Her face was stone, her eyes cold steel, her white designer dress glowing under the lights like polished armor. The tension was unbearable. Every camera zoomed tighter. This wasn't a hearing anymore. It was a showdown. The chamber was already trembling from silence when Jasmine leaned forward, her voice cutting clean through the air. Mrs. Trump, is it true you renegotiated your prenuptial agreement with Mr. Trump before moving into the White House? The question landed like a hammer. Every senator turned their head. Every camera zoomed closer. For a moment, Melania didn't move. Then she let out a low, cold laugh that echoed like glass breaking. Ms. Crockett, perhaps you should focus on politics instead of prying into another woman's marriage. Her tone dripped with mockery and the audience shifted uneasily, sensing blood. Jasmine didn't flinch. She raised her hand toward the technicians and the screen behind her flickered to life. The giant monitors lit up with the Vanity Fair article from 2018, bold black letters glowing in the chamber. Melania renegotiated her prenup before moving into the White House. A wave of noise ripped through the room. Reporters scrambled over their laptops' keys, clattering like gunfire, their eyes wide. Jasmine pointed sharply at one highlighted passage. She delayed moving into the White House for months, using that delay as leverage. The words were as clear as a blade. The silence that followed was shattered by Melania's sudden snap. Fake news, that magazine has attacked my family for years. Her voice rang out louder than before, edged with fury. Jasmine's reply was calm, unshaken. So you deny every word of it? Her eyes never left Melania's face. The former First Lady leaned back in her chair, her lips twisting into a sneer. I deny everything that is not tied to truth. And you, Ms. Crockett, are nothing more than a scavenger looking for scraps. The insult was sharp, meant to cut, but Jasmine didn't waver. The room had turned into a powder keg, every senator, every camera, every viewer at home waiting for the next strike. Melania's icy disdain collided with Jasmine's steel composure, and the tension grew unbearable. Slowly, Jasmine reached down, her hand steady, and drew out the thick red folder that had been sitting like a warning at her desk. She flipped it open with precision and pulled out a document sealed with a bold notary stamp. The camera zoomed tight on the paper as she laid it flat on the table. The screens around the chamber lit up again, now showing the faded blue ink of a signature. Donald J. Trump, 2017. Gasps rippled through the chamber like a shock wave. Some senators covered their mouths. Reporters rose half out of their seats. Melania's face froze, her eyes narrowing to slits. Jasmine rose slightly from her chair, holding the paper high for all to see. Her voice cut like a blade through the roar of the crowd. Clause 12. She read each word, delivered like a verdict. The wife is guaranteed $50 million if she does not disclose damaging details regarding the personal life and marriage of her husband during his term in office. The words landed with explosive force. The chamber erupted. Shouts, gasps, angry calls filled the air. The camera zoomed wildly between Jasmine's steady face and Melania's stone mask. Senators pounded their fists for order. Reporters shouted into phones. Every eye was on Melania, now the weight of the revelation bearing down on her like a storm. The hearing had crossed a line, and nothing in that room or in America watching at home would ever be the same. The explosion from Jasmine's revelation had barely settled when Melania snapped back her voice, shaking with rage. This is a fabrication. Someone forged these papers to smear my honor. Her words echoed across the chamber like a whip. Then with a sharp smile curling at the edge of her lips, she leaned forward, her tone dripping with venom. How pitiful it is that a young congresswoman must dig through another woman's private life just to build her career. The mockery cut deep and a wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Jasmine, steady as stone, didn't break. Her voice was calm but sharp enough to slice through the noise. This isn't private life, she said. This is a contract tied to the national interest. Her words hung heavy, deliberate, as if daring Melania to deny it again. Melania tilted her head back and laughed cold and cruel. Oh, so you care about my marriage more than my husband does. Perhaps you should try being married before speaking of it. The jab landed like a slap, and instantly a cluster of Republican senators broke into applause, smirks painted on their faces. Their laughter carried across the chamber like jeers at a prize fight. Jasmine refused to flinch. Slowly, she reached back into the red folder and slid out another document, flipping the page with precision. Her eyes stayed locked on Melania as she held it up for the technicians. Let's move beyond rumor, Jasmine said. The monitors flashed again, this time revealing a printed email chain stamped with the header from Michael Cohen's office. The chamber froze as the words scrolled across the screen. It was Cohen, the same fixer who had once negotiated gag orders and hush money. Jasmine's voice rang out steady and cutting. Negotiation of $50 million alimony contingent on non-disclosure of marital issues. The text glared down at the senators like a confession carved in stone. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters fired questions under their breath, keyboards hammering like gunfire. Some senators leaned forward, squinting, mouths slightly open. Melania's lips tightened, her eyes burning like ice. She snapped back, her voice sharp and defensive. You understand nothing. Women like me protect our families. Unlike you, a woman who only wants to divide. The words spat out like venom, a shield of righteousness thrown up against the evidence. Her supporters seized the moment, more clapping, louder cheers from the Republican side. Their voices rose to drown Jasmine out, mocking applause and laughter bouncing off the marble walls. But Jasmine's side of the chamber roared back with equal force. The split was visible, a line carved right through the heart of the room. Half the chamber bristled with indignation at Melania's sneers, half stood ready to shield her with applause. The cameras caught it all, the smirks, the fury, the tension that threatened to boil over. This wasn't just testimony anymore. It was war waged in front of the nation, and the country was watching every word. The chamber was still split when the next blow landed, a hushes stretched thin as wire across the rows in the press gallery above. Jasmine rose from her chair, spine straight, eyes locked on Melania, the red folder, a scarlet weight at her fingertips, the kind of weight that promises consequences. Her voice did not tremble as she faced the microphones, and the nation steady as a judge pronouncing the first word. If you say this is fake, explain why Mr. Trump's signature is here. The words rang through marble like a bell that refused to stop ricocheting off columns and cameras. Technicians switched feeds, and the giant screens cut to a tight zoom of blue ink crawling across the page, every stroke magnified and unforgiving, each flourish impossible to ignore. On the monitors, the signature filled the room. Donald J. Trump, crisp and undeniable, the flourish, bright as a brand. Gasps cracked the silence as photographers leaned in, and shutters rattled like hail, a metallic stutter that set nerves on edge. Melania slammed her palm on the table so hard the microphones jumped, a sharp report that made several heads whip around. Enough! You have no right to insult my marriage. The line hit like a slap, but Jasmine did not so much as blink, her posture a map of control, her resolve anchored like steel. This isn't an insult, it's the truth that must be clarified. She lifted the supplemental page as if raising a verdict, the paper hissing as it turned beneath the lights. Her cadence was iron, each syllable balanced to travel to the last row, each pause a deliberate demand for attention. In the event of divorce, the wife agrees not to participate in media interviews or write a memoir exposing private life in exchange for $50 million payable within 90 days. The chamber lurched, the gallery erupting into a ragged roar. that scraped the ceiling, then broke into rapid waves of shock rolling down the aisles. Senators bowed together, trading shocked whispers, gag contract their faces drain, and tight their hands hovering uselessly over folders. Reporters hammered keyboards in bursts, phones lit up, and camera lenses drank the scene like fire, hungry and relentless, swallowing detail after detail. Color rose fast across Melania's face as she leaned into the mic, fury burning through the ice, her knuckles white on the tabletop, her shoulders drawn like a bow. If you think you are clever, you are mistaken. In America, marriage is private, not a game for Congress. Her words tried to slam the door on the subject and bolt it from the inside, but Jasmine answered without raising her volume, letting precision do the cutting, her gaze steady as a laser. But when marriage is turned into a political instrument, it is no longer private. The sentence hung in the air like a gavel, frozen mid-swing, daring anyone to breathe first, and the room obeyed, suspended on the edge of a decision consequence poised there. The chamber was still vibrating with whispers when Melania leaned back, eyes flashing, and let her words strike like knives. I see you like fame. Perhaps you want to replace me on the magazine covers. The sneer slid across the room, aimed to humiliate, and a few muffled laughs rose from her side. Cameras tightened on Jasmine's face, waiting for a reaction, but she didn't blink. Her reply came sharp and clean, each word ringing with steel. I don't care about magazines. I care about the truth. Melania snapped back instantly, voice cutting like glass. The truth. The truth is, my husband was president of the United States, and you are just a small name. Her supporters leaned back smugly, nodding. The words carried the weight of a throne, meant to belittle and dismiss. But Jasmine only let a slow, cold smile cross her face, a smile that carried more defiance than anger. This small name, she said evenly, is bringing truth into the light before millions. The counterpunch hit harder than any insult could. The chamber roared alive. Some senators stood demanding order, voices echoing off marble like thunder. Others clapped their hands on desks in protest, feeding the chaos. The press gallery leaned over the rails, cameras locked on Melania, whose jaw tightened as she fought to hold her composure. Every lens caught the twitch in her face, the effort it took to stay still. Jasmine refused to let the moment cool. She leaned into the microphone, her voice cutting through the noise with surgical precision. My question is simple. Did you sign a contract worth $50 million to stay silent or not? The room froze again. For the first time, Melania hesitated. Her silence dragged, stretching like a noose around the chamber's air. Then, with a sudden tilt of her head, she let out a sharp, bitter chuckle. She turned away from Jasmine, smiling faintly, the kind of smile meant to mock without answering. The cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of her face. The evasion was clear, but the silence spoke louder than any denial. The cameras still lingered on Melania's evasive smile when Jasmine moved fast and precise, sliding a new document from the red folder like a final card. Technicians switched feeds as the big screens bloomed with a banking memo stamped in tidy fonts and watermarks that left no room for doubt. Across the top, the letterhead was unmistakable. Deutsche Bank, long documented as a principal lender to Mr. Trump, stared back at the chamber like a witness. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She only tapped the page once, letting the microphones drink the sound as if they were tasting proof. Numbers and notations scrolled under the crest clean as a scalpel, while the press gallery folded forward in unison. Then a single line snapped into focus, highlighted in stark gray, 50 mm settlement. Confidential. The words pulsed on the screen like a heartbeat, brutal and simple. This was the hinge of the whole case, proof that $50 million wasn't fantasy on paper, but money already mapped, reserved, waiting to move. A hush fell so hard it felt physical, a weight pressing down on suits and cameras and the old marble itself. Somewhere a pen hit the floor and skittered, the tiny sound slicing through the stillness like a crack in glass. Melania's control snapped at the edges. Her poise shook. Her breath went shallow, but the acid stayed. She leaned to the mic, fingers trembling against the stem, and her voice came harsh and frayed. Who do you think you are to teach me how to live? Her words cracked through the silence, like a thrown plate, shards of anger flying everywhere. A few allies tried to rally with tight smiles, but the gallery didn't move. The memo still burned on the screens. Jasmine answered without flinching shoulders, square gaze, steady, the words delivered like a clean cut. I am a representative of the people who have the right to know when money is used to hide the truth. The reaction was instant and thunderous. A wall of applause slamming down from the public seats and rolling across the chamber in waves. Hands crashed together, shoes-stamped voices rose, and the sound swallowed the last of the doubt like surf over stones. Senators called for order, gavels rattled, but the clapping kept coming, driven by the simple logic glowing on the screens. Deutsche Bank, on the letterhead the phrase 15M settlement, confidential, the unmistakable shape of a plan that had nothing to do with love. Jasmine stood still inside the storm, letting the noise confirm what the paper already proved, and when the sound finally broke, the cameras stayed fixed on her. Order crept back in pieces like glass being set down carefully in a room that had forgotten how to breathe. The memo still glowed, stubborn and bright, refusing to fade. Melania stared at it, jaw-tight, eyes wet with fury. Jasmine lowered the page, calm again, as the applause ebbed. Every viewer understood the money was not a rumor anymore. The applause from the memo had barely faded when the confrontation snapped into naked threat. Melania rose in a single hard motion, shoulders squared, fingers stabbing the air straight at Jasmine. You will regret ever touching me. The words cracked like a whip, ricocheting off marble and cameras and the tight faces on the dais. Gasps flared and the room tightened, as if the oxygen itself had been warned. Jasmine lifted her chin, gaze steady, and answered without raising her voice. You can threaten me, but you cannot threaten the United States of America. The sentence rang like a bell through the gallery, clear, defiant, unafraid. Senators traded looks. Staffers froze. The country leaned closer to its screens. The fight had jumped from documents to willpower, and neither side meant to blink. Every camera red light burned like a fuse. The chairman slammed the gavel twice and declared recess, his voice riding above the storm. Sound fractured into pockets, shouting phones ringing, chairs scraping, security moving fast to the aisles. The microphones hummed and then fell silent as feeds rolled over to exterior shots. Inside, the air pressed down in waves, hot with adrenaline and the metallic taste of anger. Melania and Jasmine stood frozen in the eye of it, two magnets pulling the nation taut. The cameras cut in close as Melania broke first, turning on her heel and stepping from her chair with an iron face. Her eyes were glass and fire, but her jaw was a locked door the crowd could not open. Jasmine remained seated, spine-straight, eyes steady. The red folder closed like a seal over the table. Reporters trailed the departing figure, while others circled the still center, hungry for breath and quotes. Outside the chamber, chirons began to load and drafts began to fly. By the time the gavel's echo thinned, the newsrooms had their headline built in thunder. $50 million to stay silent. Screens across the country flashed the phrase in bold and talk radio, seized it like a siren. Pundits rehearsed arguments on loop, while callers swore they had never seen anything so brazen. In kitchens and union halls and church basements, older voters leaned closer to the crawl and whispered to the room. The question was simple, and it cut straight: money for silence or silence to protect power. The public split almost instantly, with one half calling it righteous accountability and the other half calling it persecution, dressed as theater. Donors, strategists, and former aides lined up on cable panels to rescue the narrative, but the memo and the number wouldn't move. What remained in the center of the storm was the image of Jasmine, unmoved, and the sound of the gavel that could not erase it. She had dragged the question into daylight, and it refused to go back into any drawer no matter who slammed it. The country could argue forever, but one fact stood bright and heavy. Jasmine had opened a debate that could not be buried. The storm inside Congress did not die when the gavel fell. It spread like wildfire through every television in America. News networks seized on the same 20 seconds of footage, Jasmine Crockett standing tall. The red folder raised like a sword, her voice ringing as she read the damning words about a $50 million contract for silence. Anchors dissected the clip in slow motion, zooming in on Melania's flicker of rage, rewinding Jasmine's icy calm, playing it over and over until the entire country could recite it line by line. On CNN, it was called "The Shot Heard Around the World." On Fox News, it was branded a circus act in a suit. But whether praised or condemned, it was everywhere, and everyone was watching. In coffee shops across the Midwest, televisions, mounted in corners, replayed the confrontation, while customers whispered over steaming cups. In diners from Ohio to Texas, forks froze midair as regulars leaned closer to catch every frame. On smartphones, the clip looped endlessly, shared by millions turned into memes, slowed down, captioned, remixed. Facebook lit up with angry debates, TikTok with parody lip syncs, YouTube with analysis breakdowns. Some users laughed, some seethed, some cried, but no one looked away. The clip had jumped from politics into culture and from culture into obsession. At the same time, inside Washington, knives were being sharpened. Republican strategists flooded the airwaves, eager to frame Jasmine's attack as a reckless stunt. On Sunday Morning Talk, shows polished senators and congressmen repeated the same talking points like a script. "She's grandstanding," one declared, adjusting his tie. "This is not oversight, this is theater." Another smirked for the camera. "She's chasing headlines, not justice. A show horse, not a workhorse." Their language was cold, deliberate, meant to brand her as shallow. And for a moment, the strategy seemed to stick until the public answered back. Because across the nation, in quieter places, another story was being told. In barber shops in Detroit, in veterans' halls in Pennsylvania, in church basements in Georgia, older voters leaned into their televisions and nodded. They had lived through Watergate, through Clinton's impeachment, through the endless parade of scandals that stained the White House. And to them, Jasmine looked different. "She's not scared," one grandmother told a local news crew, her voice shaking with conviction. Finally, someone with guts. A retired factory worker put it even simpler. "They call her a show horse." Now, she's the only one pulling the load. In poll after poll, the demographic least expected to back Jasmine, older Americans, were the ones most likely to say she was telling the truth. Melania, furious at the shifting tide, struck back with money and lawyers. Within hours, she had summoned a small army of attorneys, the kind who charged thousands an hour and wore their suits like armor. The message was clear: a defamation suit was coming, and Jasmine Crockett would pay for daring to pull the curtain. Reporters outside the Trump estate buzzed with anticipation, snapping photos of black cars pulling into driveways. Headlines screamed, "Melania prepares legal war." It was not just politics now. It was law, the kind of law that drained bank accounts and stretched years. But Melania didn't stop with lawyers. She went on the offensive, stepping into the familiar glow of Fox News. Sitting across from a friendly anchor, she was polished and icy, her accent sharp as crystal, her hands folded in perfect poise. A young woman seeking light by burning rumors, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "That is all this is, rumors." The clip was packaged instantly into a soundbite, blasted across conservative radio, played on loop at rallies. Her supporters cheered, and the faithful nodded along. To them, it was another witch hunt, another stage drama against the Trump family. But the counterstrike came fast. Hours later, Jasmine appeared under the softer lights of CNN, seated across from Anderson Cooper. The red folder lay in front of her like a silent witness, its edges still sharp, its pages still heavy. Cooper asked the question directly: "Melania Trump calls this rumor. How do you respond?" Jasmine leaned forward, eyes locked on the camera, her voice steady as a blade. "Rumors don't come with notarized signatures," she said. The line sliced through the airwaves, clipped and replayed instantly on social media, quoted in headlines across newspapers, shared in GIFs and graphics. If Melania had thrown shade, Jasmine had thrown fire. The fight exploded beyond Washington, beyond any hearing room or Senate hall. It became a national war of narratives, a full-scale collision of networks' headlines and commentary. Fox framed Jasmine as reckless, CNN framed her as fearless, MSNBC painted her as historic. YouTube swelled with amateur breakdowns of the signature, TikTok stitched her words into remixes, Twitter boiled with conspiracy threads, dissecting the Deutsche Bank memo. Even late-night comedians weighed in, some mocking Melania's cold laughter, others raising eyebrows at the sheer brazenness of the $50 million clause. The culture had turned it into spectacle, but the core question refused to vanish: was silence for sale in the White House? Meanwhile, Jasmine walked through it all like a figure under constant lightning. Everywhere she went, cameras followed. Every word she spoke was dissected. Praise condemned, turned into content. For her supporters, she was a warrior, the woman who dared. For her enemies, she was a danger, reckless and theatrical. But either way, she was unavoidable. Melania could summon lawyers, Republican leaders could sneer, strategists could spin. But the clip of Jasmine holding that folder, the phrase 50 million settlement, would not die. And that was the true battlefield, not in the marble halls of Congress, not in courtrooms, but in the minds of millions of Americans split right down the middle. At family dinners, arguments flared. At work, co-workers whispered across desks. On Facebook, old friends blocked each other. The fight had become personal, tribal, unstoppable. Every citizen had to pick a side, the glamorous former First Lady insisting it was rumor, or the young Congresswoman declaring it was truth in ink. By the end of the week, one fact was undeniable. This was no longer a hearing. It was no longer about Melania or Jasmine alone. It was a national spectacle, a cultural earthquake, a war that had left the chamber and invaded every home, every cafe, every feed. What began with a red folder in a tense hearing room had grown into a debate America could not escape. A debate over money, power, and silence, and whether one woman's signature was enough to hide the truth from an entire country. America split in two. Living rooms, offices, and bars turned into battlegrounds of opinion. Half the country pointed at the glowing screens and said Jasmine Crockett had delivered the truth no one else dared to touch. The other half swore it was a witch hunt, a staged attack to humiliate a First Lady. Lines were drawn not just in Congress but at dinner tables and on sidewalks. In some homes, fathers and daughters argued. In others, couples sat in silence, their televisions replaying the confrontation on an endless loop. The United States was divided, and the divide was jagged. Television networks amplified every second. Frame by frame, the confrontation replayed the bold signature, Donald J. Trump, magnified until it filled the screen, the phrase, $50 million, flashing beneath it, and Melania's eyes in close-up as Jasmine cornered her with questions. CNN cut in slow motion to the instant Melania's jaw clenched. Fox froze the tape at Jasmine's raised finger, calling it performance. MSNBC replayed the tremor in the chamber, when the clause was read aloud, describing it as the sound of America gasping. On screen, each detail became evidence for one side and ammunition for the other. Experts joined the fire. On morning programs, marriage attorneys sat with binders on their laps, dissecting the legal implications. Renegotiating a prenuptial agreement just before a presidency, one lawyer explained, can absolutely be interpreted as a form of buying silence. If you're securing millions in exchange for discretion, it ceases to be personal, it becomes political leverage. Another shook his head gravely. This is not about divorce law. This is about whether truth itself can be contracted out. Their words ran like aftershocks across the airwaves, giving viewers new fuel for outrage or vindication. Historians entered next, their voices heavy with comparisons. A panel on PBS leaned forward as one said quietly, "This could be the biggest political family scandal since Watergate." Another added, "Watergate was about breaking into offices and covering up. This, if true, is about a marriage turned into a business contract structured not to preserve love, but to preserve power." That's unprecedented in American history. The word Watergate lingered on every channel, echoing across social media until it became shorthand for scandal itself. Suddenly, Jasmine Crockett was being compared not just to a congresswoman grilling a first lady, but to a figure pulling America into a new era of reckoning. Melania refused to stay silent. Every camera seemed to find her, and every microphone caught her words dripping with disdain. On Fox News, she spat out the line that ricocheted across the country. "Ms. Crockett is a nobody trying to bring me down for attention." Her face was carved in anger, her tone mired in contempt. Supporters cheered, sharing the clip with captions about dignity and grace under fire. But the sneer cut both ways. To Jasmine's defenders, it was proof of arrogance, proof that Melania still believed her name alone made her untouchable. The insult only widened the split. Jasmine's response came not with fury, but with clarity. In a follow-up interview, she sat still, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "My reputation doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that the American people know the truth. No theatrics, no shouting, just the line direct and unbending. For her allies, it was a rallying cry. For her critics, it was infuriating because it refused to yield. The words spread like fire, plastered across headlines quoted on talk shows, whispered in cafes. The young congresswoman was not asking to be liked, she was demanding to be heard. In households across the nation, the split hardened. Some saw Melania as the victim of an ambush, the woman of elegance reduced to defending her marriage against a political climber. Others saw Jasmine as David against Goliath, holding up evidence like a sling loaded with truth, facing not just Melania, but the entire weight of the Trump dynasty. The question was no longer whether the contract was real. The question was whether the country could handle what it meant if it was. The press could not let go. Day after day, headlines screamed the same phrase, 50 million for silence. Every morning show, every late-night segment, every newspaper editorial circled the same number. The figure had burned itself into America's consciousness. 50 million. It wasn't abstract. It was shocking, visceral, too large to ignore. When Jasmine's red folder appeared in graphics packages, viewers leaned forward already knowing what was inside. When Melania's face flashed on screen, people braced themselves for another sneer, another dismissal, another denial. The more Melania tried to diminish Jasmine, the stronger the story grew. She is a nobody, Melania repeated, her lips curling, her tone bitter. But the repetition only amplified Jasmine's resolve. Crowds gathered at town halls to cheer her name. Editorials ran praising her courage. Analysts debated whether her political career had just been immortalized. Even those who doubted her evidence admitted one thing: she had forced the conversation into daylight, and daylight did not dim. By the end of the week, the hearing had transformed into something larger than politics. It became a symbol, a moment when a young congresswoman stood unflinching before a former first lady, brandishing proof that marriage itself had been weaponized into a political contract. To Jasmine's supporters, it was justice. To her detractors, it was blasphemy. But either way, it was unforgettable. The confrontation no longer belonged to Congress or to the two women at its center. It belonged to America, etched into memory with the weight of scandal and the burn of spectacle. Like Watergate, it would be studied, debated, mocked, praised, and remembered. And at its heart would remain that single image: Jasmine Crockett lifting the folder, the words 50 million filling the chamber, and the truth, or what might be truth, crashing against the walls of power. What began as a hearing ended as a legend. Not of love, not of marriage, but of power, silence, and the cost of both. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.